We're sorry. All circuits are busy now.
So, you guys really like it when I talk about Macs. So with that in mind, let's talk about my next project of Mac world domination. This is my Mac Pro 4,1, also known as an early 2009 Mac Pro. And because everyone was so happy about my bootcamp adventure, I gave it a custom side panel. Inside we have two quad-core, 8-thread Intel Xeon 5570s, a whopping 32 gigs of memory, a Radeon 4870 graphics card that we're not really going to need, and unfortunately no hard drives at the moment. But this machine is going to serve a very special purpose. We're going to turn it into a server.
Don't have the heart to live in the fast lane, all that is past and gone.
And there ain't nothing you can do about it.
So, it's not specifically relevant to this video, but Apple has in fact made many servers going way back to the 90s. The two most well-known models that, if frankly I didn't include, I would probably get bombardments of comments about are the mid-90s Apple Network server and the early 2000s Apple Xserve. I do actually own a couple of the Apple Xserves, both the G4 and the G5 models, but again, they're not relevant to today's story. Case in point, after Apple announced they were discontinuing them, someone asked Steve Jobs, and he replied, hardly anyone was buying them. Instead, today we're going to talk about two specific pieces of software, Snow Leopard Server and VMware ESXi. Apple may have stopped selling Xserve hardware, but you could still use OS X Server on a Mac. More interestingly, if you read the EULA, you may also install and use other copies of Mac OS X Server software on the same Apple-branded computer. Now, some of you that are more technically inclined might be looking at it and saying, hey, he could use Proxmox. But unfortunately not. For whatever reason, Proxmox has just never bothered to support macOS clients, even on Mac hardware. Fortunately, at least for a few years, VMware did. So, in theory, we can take a lovely Mac Pro, install VMware on it, and then run as many copies of Snow Leopard as we want. Not only that, technically we can also run regular Snow Leopard as well as Snow Leopard Server at the same time. Also, if we wanted to get really crazy, we could technically run other versions of OS X, like Tiger, or Leopard, or Lion.
Every single one of them. And not just the men, but the women. And the children, too. They're like animals.
Hi, Editing Sean here. No, that's actually incorrect. For some reason, even on a Mac, you cannot run Snow Leopard clients in ESXi. And if you try to boot the install CD, it just powers itself off.
Aren't we forgetting one teensy-weensy but ever so crucial little tiny detail? I own you!
And while I have many more Intel Macs, it looks like I'm going to still need the one from the last video to continue doing software testing. But before we get to that, I want to continue just lambasting ESXi for a minute.
I got a lot of problems with you people. Now, you're going to hear about it.
Do you remember when Windows 11 came out and had those CPU requirements that everyone lost their minds about, even though they were completely reasonable? Yeah, it turns out VMware does the exact same thing, except they are way more aggressive about it. Being a Mac Pro, the CPUs in this are original Nehalem Xeons from 2009. They're not exactly new by any measure, but as far as ESXi goes, it supports it up to version 6.5, first released in 2016. If I upgraded the CPU to a pair of Xeon 5600s, I could at least upgrade one more version to VMware ESXi that. But unfortunately version 7 and above will still refuse to run for reasons. Anyway, I spent several hours troubleshooting this and finding a version that worked best, so I just needed you all to suffer with me.
I scream for you, I scream for me, I scream for someone to set me free.
So after what was many hours of tinkering, we finally have a working VMware ESXi machine. If you've ever used Proxmox, you might just look at that and think this looks broadly familiar, if just a bit uglier. But the fun part is, unlike Proxmox, we can now run Mac OS X Server. Mercifully, this is all pretty easy. It offers both a 32-bit and 64-bit version of Snow Leopard for some reason, even though it's a 64-bit operating system. We can select the local NAS, so we have lots of storage. We're going to give it 4 CPUs and about 8 gig of memory, and a 100 gig hard drive. And we are going to connect this to the CompuGlobal HyperMegaNet, so if you haven't seen that video, I'd suggest go and watch it after this. But now I need to figure out where I put the Snow Leopard server ISO. Unfortunately, VMware only allows booting ISO files. You can't actually boot a Mac DMG, which made this a little more difficult to get going. But once I was able to find one that worked, we can go ahead and hit next, verify all our settings are correct, because it is really annoying to change these. Then we'll just hit finish. One other annoying deficiency that Proxmox fixed is it doesn't automatically power on new virtual machines, so you have to go and do that manually. But as you can see here, immediately it just starts booting. It also complains continuously that it needs VMware tools, but we'll fix that later. Now I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead a little bit here, because installing OS X Server is not that interesting on its own, other than the fact that the background is slightly different to the normal Snow Leopard one. It is just like installing any other version of Mac OS X. Also, just ignore these, because I wasn't the only one working on this Mac at the time of recording.
I can see you, bitch!
One thing that is different from standard macOS is not only does it ask you where you're using the system, it asks you what kind of computers are both on your network and what services the server is going to run. I'm not clear if that enables or disables things by default, since the OS is already installed, but it is an interesting difference. Now we just set our time zone. Technically we're in Los Angeles, but nobody likes Los Angeles, so we're going to say we're actually from Seattle. And since this is just a test server, the password's just going to be retro. Finally, we need to set a static IP address. The reason for this is CompuGlobal HyperMegaNet has its own DNS server, so we can take the machine's IP address and give it a domain name like snowleopard.retro, and when you put that into a browser on the network, it will actually resolve to and connect to this machine like it was a real server on the real internet. If you saw the video I did about a year ago where I got a Google search server running on CompuGlobal HyperMegaNet, you might have noticed the domain was google.retro. And that's basically what we're doing here. We're making a real server with a real domain name that can serve real clients, like it was in the real world. But also, because we're on a retro network, we're going to just turn off IPv6 for sanity's sake. Once that's all set, it will then ask what to name the computer, and then also what to set as a DNS name. In this case, we're going to set it to sneptest.retro. We are going to eventually change it to .mac, but that's for a future video. After double checking our work, it will then evaluate the network, and we can move on to configuring an Open Directory server. If you've ever worked with Microsoft Active Directory, it's basically the Mac version of that. The idea being that you can have a bunch of Macs on a network, and you can set up users and other features, and then they can log in on any Mac on the network, and then have access to all their files, have access to Mac-based email, and other functionality. I do have to give Apple credit here. The sheer number of services that you can run on their servers is quite impressive. It really was designed to be all-encompassing for everything you might need as a small to even medium-sized business. Once complete, it then verifies its own serial number that we entered earlier. If you need a serial number, you can find those online, but that's all I'm going to say about that. It then sets the usual network name, computer name, date and time, creates some users, and then begins starting all the various services that you installed. After the install completed, I needed to set a few more network settings, namely the order of DNS servers. For some reason, by default, it tries to use itself as a DNS server, which is fine, except it doesn't know any other sites or servers on the network, so it can't resolve anything. As an added bonus, unlike Windows, macOS is more than happy to talk to an FTP server natively, so we can go and get a newer browser, as long as I don't completely fumble and go into the wrong directory. As an aside, it's really cool that you can still get a relatively modern version of Firefox that supports everything from Tiger up through Snow Leopard, both on Intel and PowerPC machines. Unfortunately, it seems to have some weird issues on Snow Leopard server, at least in a virtual machine, but on a desktop where I have actual graphics acceleration, it is smooth and wonderful. This was also around the point where I discovered that I cannot set up an OS X Snow Leopard client inside of ESXi. Unfortunately, this meant that it was significantly more difficult for me to test the server features, so I had to resort to using a Windows virtual machine.
I'm limited by the technology of my time, but one day you'll figure this out. And when you do, you will change the world.
Because this is an Apple server, they have a commitment to making things relatively easy. To that end, setting up a web server is as simple as toggling an on-off switch and then telling it what web services you want enabled. Once connected to, this is the default landing page we get, where you can set up things like wikis, you can set up a personal blog for employees, and then you can also set up My Page, which users can then log into and set up features like a calendar or access webmail and other functionality. It's really quite impressive for stuff that's just all out of the box.
I can do it all right out of the box, so what about you?
Well, first I gotta download those new drivers, and I gotta erase the trial software that came on my hard drive.
Sweet.
Then I've got a lot of manuals to read.
You know, it sounds like you have a lot of stuff to do before you do any stuff, so I'm just gonna get started because I'm kind of excited. Let me know when you're ready.
There's a lot of additional functionality like file sharing, iCal, iChat, mail, and VPN that I'd love to check out, but I suspect a lot of it needs more Macs. And in light of being unable to run OS X Snow Leopard as a client, I'm going to need to probably end this video here until I set up more Macs to do physical demonstrations of how all of this software works together. I have two goals for this Mac OS server machine. The first one being to look at all of these services as they were designed, which is to integrate them with Macs, not Windows or Linux clients necessarily. The other goal is we're going to be rebuilding and re-implementing some Mac features that no longer exist from around the late 90s to early 2000s. We could do this just using a Linux system, but that's really not as much fun and is not really true to form for how Apple at least claimed they ran those services back in the day. But now that we've come to the end of the video, I need to do all of the things that make the YouTube algorithm happy, like telling you to subscribe if you enjoyed this video or want to see where the series goes, and hit the bell and do all the other things. If you are interested in joining the Retro Network, I do have a 30-minute talk that I gave on the CompuGlobal HyperMegaNet that goes more into detail about what that is and how it all works. I also have a Discord server. And finally, if you want to be really helpful, I have a Patreon. $1 a month unlocks everything. I do want to make this sort of a full-time career, so every little bit of support goes a long way. Otherwise, I'm now going to go and set up a bunch of old Macs and see if I can get them all joined up to this server.